So my own work has been on climate change for quite a while, and particularly what I'm going to be talking about today is around the cultural politics of climate change and some of the battles, with a bit more of a focus on the US than the EU, although I think it's to some degree a global phenomenon, and then the role of transnational networks in shaping some of the policy and ideas towards a consensus or a hegemonic understanding of how the climate issue could be addressed. So just start off thinking about why is there so much inertia, given the science and the way that it's evolved in the last few years. There are a whole bunch of other explanations we won't be able to get into now. You know, collective action, inertia of complex systems, written a little bit about some of these other things. More political economy explanations based on the power of the fossil fuel industry. Well, we're going to focus on some of these, particularly the media, fossil fuel industry, but as they come together in a network. And the idea here is that it does take networks of actors, states, business, NGOs, to form consensus, to form hegemonic ideas about what the problem is and how to move forward in solutions. So just to sort of outline cultural political economy, I haven't got time even really for the outline, but building on work from Bob Jessup, also Matt Patterson, who's maybe more familiar with some of you here, really it is thinking about both the cultural constitution of markets and value, and on the other side, the political economy of culture. So it's the interaction of the economic and the cultural. And I think a key idea that comes from Jessup's interpretation of this is that if we want to move towards a new economic regime, we need a new imaginary. And by the imaginary, it is that collective set of ideas that informs how we understand an idea. And here, the particular economic regime that we're thinking about is the energy regime. So we're thinking about the transition from a fossil fuel-based energy regime toward a clean energy regime. What I would add to this, and sort of part of my project over the years, has been to infuse the economy back into the cultural political economy, which means that imaginaries work and take off when there's a business model. And what we've seen, certainly since 2008, and here's part of the punchline in case I don't get to it later, is that the economic crisis, the failure of clean energy to make money for folks, has also made it difficult for the broader ideology of green jobs, venture capital, the techno market imaginary to take off. It stumbled partly because the business model of that imaginary has stumbled. So here, what I'm trying to do is link the success or failure of a particular ideology to its material base. So we call these regimes value regimes. The energy regime, the fossil fuel energy system is a value regime, in the sense that it's both a field of actors, it's a system of governance that stabilizes the fossil fuel regime, norms, standards, you know, all this stuff. And it also stabilizes value in two senses, a production system of value creation, value distribution, as well as values. How we think of the environment. Do we consider the climate to be a problem or not? Do we think that the climate is unstable? If more broadly, is how fragile is the environment? So within that climate imaginaries are the more specifically cultural piece of a larger value regime. And what I want to make the case here is that there's been a struggle over the last few decades among 4 different imaginaries. And there's a paper based on this piece without the transnational networks that's just been accepted in organizations. So if anyone's interested, I can follow up and send you that. But the paper describes the historical evolution and contestation among these imaginaries. And we'll see. And then today, what I'm trying to add is the role of transnational networks in these battles. So fossil fuels forever, climate apocalypse, techno market, sustainable lifestyles. What are they? Well, fossil fuels forever is where we've been. The idea that we'll always have fossil fuels, they don't damage the climate, they're cheap, reliable. And this has been very much locked in because the technologies perform. You know, I drove here because public transport was kind of inconvenient and I'd be cold. You know, it's locked into our lifestyles, into what we value, as well as the political power of the fossil fuel lobby, the car industry, the airlines, and so on. That's the imaginary where we've been and maybe we're trying to get out of, but it locks in a particular value regime as well. Where I'm going to emphasize, though, is that in the period from around 2000 to 2008, we saw the ascendancy of the techno market imaginary. And by this, I mean an understanding that we could transition to a clean energy economy in which we could use technologies, solar, wind, clever software to manage energy use in buildings such as this. So there's the technology side, but there's also the market innovation side, cap and trade, clever kinds of carbon taxes, tradable RPS that we have in the US, the renewable portfolio standards with tradable credits, all sorts of clever markets. So that's the techno market imaginary. And this, the claim here is this has been moving toward hegemonic status. And the reason for that is that it entails a larger network of enthusiasts from states who buy into the notion of the Green New Deal, competitiveness, that regions at least could base a new era of economic growth on these new technologies. Certainly around here, the Mass Clean Energy Centre and the New England Clean Energy Council have been sort of fueling that. It's maybe happening at a local level, but you've been hearing Obama talking about the green economy as well. So it's that optimism around that on that side, but on the business side as well, of course, you know, there are market opportunities, whether you're a financial trader who might want to trade carbon credits, or General Electric thinking that there's going to be great business opportunities in wind, so they've been buying into wind and other high efficiency areas. So it brings business on board, but there's also, you know, accounting firms and consultants who get involved in counting carbon, in all sorts of measurement projects as well, and the NGOs, the more market-oriented environmental NGOs jump in. So we're seeing the emergence of that network, and the claim here is that that's critical to forge a hegemonic bloc in Gramscian terms. Those of you who know me know that I sort of draw from this. So it's been a very attractive imaginary, and it's been on a trajectory toward a new value regime. That's been drawing as well as competing with what I'll call the climate apocalypse. Some of you might have read Bill McKibben's piece in Rolling Stone last summer. If you haven't, go and read it. It's a very, very good piece. Basically, the end of the world, we're going up in smoke, which is a background imaginary discourse. We see it in the popular media, in a number of movies, that partly informs other, closely related perhaps, to other imaginaries, particularly the sustainable lifestyles. And I've got, you know, a small group of my enviro friends who really dismiss the techno market idea, saying that we can't continue with economic growth. Technology won't solve our problems. You sort of probably know this discourse. We all need to get on bikes, maybe not go back to caves, but there's a sense that we have to give up aspects of our industrial consumer lifestyle. But my claim is that this hasn't really taken off. It hasn't built the larger network because it's not a very attractive discourse, and it's very hard to find the business models. So both for states, where's the business model here, as well as for businesses themselves, you can't make too much money by selling less stuff. Maybe Zipcar does okay, you know, sharing, but it's not that easy generally building business models out of it. This sort of shows the relationship among the various imaginaries, and the claim here is that the techno market imaginary is hegemonic because it claims to reconcile economic goals with environmental goals. Sorry, it's a little bit small here, but I won't go into the detail. This is in the paper if you want to get it. But it's that claim to represent the general interest. You don't have to give anything up. You don't have to give up your lifestyle. Business can prosper. States can regain competitiveness, and as consumers, we'll have lots of little goodies from our phones to our Priuses. So in reconciling those potentially antagonistic claims, it's a it's sort of a hegemonic claim. Okay, where's transnational climate governance here? So here I'm going to relate this, switching gears a little bit, to a project I've been involved with Matt, and really initiated by Harriet Balkerley with the Levy Trust grants. She's at Durham, so a bunch of us have been involved in this. And we were looking at 60 initiatives, and it's only recently that I've sort of been thinking about this in relation to this other work. We were looking at 60 different transnational networks, a lot of them involving private actors, public actors, some NGOs, some businesses. And a paper came out recently about this, and I was going through these thinking, well, how do these initiatives map onto those various imaginaries? How do they, what kind of world are they envisioning? And I was thinking that there would be some spread across them. Okay, just to give you a sense, the paper does go into the detail. Most of these were founded after Kyoto from 97, and about half between 97 and 2005, another half post 2005. To give you a sense of the kind of work that's been done on them, we look at the spread of different causes or goals that these initiatives have set out for themselves. You can see here adaptation, maybe it's too small to see on the board there, adaptation, energy, carbon sequestration, market development, clean energy, food, and you can sort of see where how they're spread out here, as well as classifying by function, capacity building, information sharing, funding, target setting, rule setting. The claim, of course, is that they play some role in governance. But what I found particularly interesting in relating it back to the emergence of this hegemonic regime is the motivating worldview of the initiating actors. So this is, Kloppendevonie is adapted from there, but this is in the, Matt, you probably remember the exact citation better than I do here. But the point being is that the worldview, missing a D there, of the initiating actors is primarily around let's create new markets, new institutions, and I'm going to make the strong claim, perhaps, that almost without exception, maybe there's one or two that don't quite fit in, almost all of them are pushing the techno market imaginary. They're all pushing the win-win discourse. Look, technology, new markets are going to save the world. The social greens and bioenviros, you can look in the paper to see how they're classified, around 7–8% each. And yet, when you look at the networks themselves, even when you have more radical groups that are initiating them, you'll find that they fall into the techno market package. We also classified the action legitimacy of initiating actors. Urgency perhaps falls into the climate apocalypse. We've got to do something really fast because otherwise the world's going to collapse. But efficiency and learning fall much more into that central techno-market imaginary. Again, justice somewhat marginalized. Now, you probably won't be able to see this list, but the list is in the full paper. And when you go across them, whether it's methane to markets, I'm just glancing, roundtable on sustainable biofuels, social carbon is probably the one exception that might stand out. But from climate group to Business Environmental Leadership Council, almost all of them are, involve aspects of business, aspects of competitiveness. How can we disseminate new technologies? How can we shape the markets? All really lined up behind there. I know I've done this myself. At UMass Boston, I founded, with a couple of others, a Center for Sustainable Enterprise and Regional Competitiveness. I mean, for people who know me, know that that's not exactly me. But why do we do that? Well, we need to raise money. We need partnerships. We need businesses involved. I mean, there's a center of gravity here that pulls us in. So even when more radical groups might be involved in these networks, they're pulled into this more hegemonic mainstream. I see I'm running maybe another 3 minutes, sort of running out of time here. The paper develops a politics of value, the contestation among these different conceptions of value and of values. How should production be organized and what should we value? And we look at how these things get aligned or misaligned. A regime, and here maybe one contribution that might be of relevance for this group is that the notion of governance is broader than governing. Right, and it's certainly even broader than I think the way others have written about transnational networks. We particularly look at the more structural role of markets in governance. so governance is much more how the whole system is operating. There might be a role of markets and market structures in governance that isn't even conceived as such. I won't go through the sort of carbon wars of the 1990s. The key issue, I think, is the carbon compromise, as we call it, in this nearly decade, maybe 9 years, and its emergence. And we saw this as, you know, as the large fossil fuel companies, except for coal perhaps, but from autos to the oil industry, realizing that modest climate regulation probably wouldn't kill them. And that was true in Europe, true here, or we saw some convergence in that they realized that a carbon price of, you know, 10, 20 bucks a ton wasn't going to kill the market for liquid fuels. They were busy diversifying into gas. There's a technology and a business model story here about how business was accommodating itself in a Gramscian way to the emergence of a new regime. What I find particularly interesting, and where I'll end here in the last minute or two, is what's happened post-2008. If there were 59 transnational networks pushing this hegemonic solution, the techno market value regime, if you like, how's it come off the rails? Has it come off the rails? It's an empirical question. Some people will be arguing with me that it hasn't exactly come off the rails, and maybe, you know, it's being resparked again now. But again, I'm offering more of a materialist explanation that the recession in 2008 dried up some venture capital sources that were funding some clean tech companies. The clean tech companies were going bankrupt. The price of carbon collapsed because the recession reduced the demand for power and the rest of it. We saw the collapse at Copenhagen, which is, you know, related to that at the negotiations. But particularly in the US, we saw the rise of the Tea Party and climate denial. And partly, you know, that was Koch brothers funding and, you know, the right-wing groups organizing. The oil industry and others suddenly rekindled the carbon wars of a decade earlier. And, you know, my suggestion on that is that the accommodation was a second-best solution. And when the oil industry saw its opening to be able to, the new political opening created by the recession, and actually got a quote from one of them to back that up, you know, they realized here's an opportunity to actually dismantle the whole infrastructure of climate regulation. But I think one of the key things is that rising unemployment has certainly taken climate down from the political agenda. There's a way in which the material reality of the recession has reshaped consciousness both of politicians, their concerns with competitiveness and jobs, as well as more broadly of the population. If you're concerned about your job, you don't worry so much about a Prius or climate change. So again, it's a material explanation for how that has influenced the broader culture, policy, and has slowed down, if not completely derailed, the move towards this hegemonic understanding of a techno-market approach. Anyway, I've used up my 15 minutes, so I'll call it a day there.